let's talk about the WNBA Finals.
The WNBA Finals were supposed to be the crown jewel of women's basketball. Instead, they turned into the most embarrassing spectacle in league history, complete with two superstars having full-blown tantrums on national television. Wilson and DeWanna Bonner, the faces of their respective franchises, completely lost it when they walked into arenas that looked more like ghost towns than championship venues.
I believe y'all don't care. I think y'all care about the drama around it. I do believe that, but I don't think you care about the events itself. And judging by ticket prices, neither does anybody else.
Picture this. You're playing in the biggest games of your career, and you look up to see rows and rows of empty red seats staring back at you. The silence was so loud it hurt. Wilson, the reigning MVP and supposed face of the Las Vegas Aces, couldn't hide her shock. During warm-ups for Game 1, cameras caught her muttering under her breath as she scanned the pathetic turnout. "This is the finals," she said, and honestly, who could blame her for being stunned? The whole thing was brutal to watch.
If ever there was proof that the Caitlin Clark fans / Fever fans are now the overwhelming majority of the fandom, look at ticket prices for finals games.
These are elite athletes who have spent their entire careers grinding to reach this moment, only to find out that apparently nobody cared enough to show up. DeWanna Bonner wasn't handling it any better. After missing a layup in Game 2, she was caught on camera shaking her head and shouting something toward the crowd that lip readers quickly decoded as something about nobody caring. But here's where it gets really wild. The tantrums weren't just quiet frustration or private venting. These meltdowns happened during live games with cameras rolling and microphones picking up every heated exchange. Asia was seen slamming her towel against the bench during a timeout, visibly angry and exchanging sharp words with teammates.
Game 1, the get-in price for Game 1 matchup between the Aces and the Mercury for a WNBA Finals game. Holy hell, there's $35 seats right there. Right there. Plenty of good seats available.
The whole scene went viral within hours, and fans immediately started roasting both players online. The post-game press conferences made everything worse. When reporters asked about the visible frustration during games, Bonner exhaled sharply before letting loose. "It's embarrassing," she said. "We put everything into this, and people act like it doesn't matter."
$35 whole dollars. This might be the best part of the video for the WNBA, because when you gauge the interest, to gauge the interest of this series, and it was ugly.
Wilson nodded beside her, looking exhausted rather than angry. "We shouldn't have to beg for respect," she added, and her voice actually cracked a little. The clips of that exchange got replayed endlessly on every sports network. ESPN started debating whether the league was in full crisis mode. Commentators pointed out the obvious irony that just months earlier, these same players were complaining about all the media attention Caitlin Clark was getting. Now they were desperately pleading for that same spotlight, and the internet wasn't about to let them forget it. The whole situation exposed something ugly about the league's relationship with its fans. These weren't just empty seats, they were a rejection. Fans had emotionally checked out the moment Caitlin Clark's Indiana Fever got eliminated, and no amount of begging or tantrums was going to bring them back. Now, here's where things get absolutely ridiculous. The ticket prices for these finals games told the whole story in the most brutal way possible. Seats for the championship game were selling for $35, $35 whole dollars for what's supposed to be the...
With DeWanna Bonner, Alyssa Thomas, and the Mercury in the finals against Wilson and the Aces, will you be locked in watching this series? ? Yes or no? Hit the poll. 4% of brave souls said yes. 96% said hell to the no.
Biggest stage in women's basketball. That's less than most people spend on dinner, and fans still weren't buying. A poll asking fans whether they'd be locked in watching the finals series delivered the most savage results imaginable. Only 4% of brave souls said yes. 4%. That means 96% of respondents basically said hell no to watching A'ja Wilson and DeWanna Bonner compete for a championship. Those numbers weren't just disappointing, they were absolutely devastating for everyone involved. The contrast with what could have been was almost painful to think about. If Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever had made it to these finals, especially with all the drama surrounding her, there wouldn't have been a single ticket available for less than $300. Courtside seats would have easily hit $5,000, and the arenas would have been packed with screaming fans instead of echoing silence.
Guys, if the Fever and Caitlin Clark was playing in a finals game, let's say against the Mercury, with all that drama around there, would there be a single ticket less than $300? Now, honestly, a single ticket less than $300. I don't think so. I think you'd have courtside seats go for $5,000. If Caitlin Clark was playing, if she was in these finals along with the Fever.
But wait, it gets even more embarrassing. Game 1 featured the Las Vegas Aces versus the Phoenix Mercury, two powerhouse teams with elite talent on both sides. This should have been electric. Instead, fans scrolling through ticket sites were absolutely stunned by how cheap everything was. Plenty of good seats were still available right up until game time, which is basically unheard of for a championship series. The optics were terrible from every angle. When A'ja Wilson walked out for warm-ups and saw entire sections of empty red seats, she couldn't hide her disbelief. This was supposed to be loud, wild, and full of energy. Instead, it felt like a scrimmage game that nobody wanted to attend.
You are not invested, you are not interested in watching this BS transpire on your television set.
The cameras couldn't avoid showing the gaps in the stands, which made everything look even more pathetic on television. Not only that, but the social media reaction was absolutely merciless. Photos of empty seats went viral immediately, sparking debates about what went completely wrong. Some people blamed high ticket prices, but $35 isn't exactly breaking the bank. Others pointed fingers at the league's marketing strategy, but the real issue was obvious to everyone except the people running the show. The whole situation became a meme within hours. Fans were posting side-by-side comparisons showing packed Fever games versus the Barron Finals. The comments were brutal and honest. You chased away your audience. One fan wrote, "Now you're playing for yourselves." Another person posted, "Maybe if they stopped hating Caitlin Clark, they'd have fans in the seats." The attendance numbers weren't just low, they were historically embarrassing. This was supposed to be the league's grandest moment, a celebration of women's basketball at its highest level. Instead, it turned into an awkward spectacle that exposed just how fragile the WNBA's popularity really was without its biggest draw. Let's take a moment to rewind and talk about the elephant in the room that nobody in the WNBA wanted to acknowledge. Caitlin Clark had single-handedly turned women's basketball into must-watch television, and her absence from the finals exposed just how dependent the entire league had become on one rookie's star power. The numbers don't lie, and they painted a picture that was absolutely devastating for everyone involved. During the regular season, every single game featuring Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever routinely drew record-breaking attendance and massive television ratings. Arenas were packed, merchandise was flying off the shelves, and casual sports fans who had never watched women's basketball before were suddenly tuning in religiously. The energy surrounding those games was electric in a way the WNBA hadn't experienced in years. But here's the brutal reality check. The moment the Fever got eliminated from the playoffs, casual viewers completely checked out. They weren't just watching women's basketball, they were watching Caitlin Clark play women's basketball. Without her magnetic presence on the court, the finals lost their sense of urgency and excitement that had defined the entire season. The television ratings told the whole story in the most unforgiving way possible. Viewership for the finals dropped almost 50% compared to the semifinals that featured Clark's Indiana Fever. That's not a small dip or a minor decline. That's a complete collapse that proved beyond any doubt where the league's real drawing power was coming from. from. Now, here's the twist that made everything even more painful for the veteran players. Just months earlier, many of these same stars had been publicly frustrated about all the media attention Caitlin Clark was receiving. They complained about rookie treatment, questioned whether she deserved the hype, and seemed annoyed by the circus that followed her everywhere she went. A'ja Wilson and other established players had subtly pushed back against the Clark phenomenon, suggesting that the league had plenty of talent that deserved recognition. They wanted credit for building the foundation that allowed a player like Clark to succeed. The problem was that fans didn't care about foundations or paying dues. They cared about entertainment, storylines, and reasons to emotionally invest in games. Not only that, but the league's marketing strategy completely backfired by trying to downplay Clark's impact. Instead of embracing the massive surge of interest she brought, officials seemed determined to spread attention around equally. That might sound fair in theory, but it ignored the basic reality of how star power works in professional sports. Sports commentators couldn't ignore the obvious anymore. You can feel the difference. One analyst said, "This isn't about the game. It's about who fans want to see representing the league." That quote became the defining statement of the entire finals, echoing across every talk show and sports podcast for weeks. The contrast was impossible to miss. Clark's games had viral highlights flooding social media, packed sports bars buzzing with excitement, and completely sold out arenas. The finals had none of that energy, no viral moments, no packed venues, and definitely no excitement from casual fans who had already moved on to other sports. But what happened next was even more shocking than the empty seats themselves. Behind closed doors, the tension inside the WNBA had reached a complete breaking point. Players, coaches, and executives were walking on eggshells trying to hold the finals together while the league's reputation crumbled in real time. What was supposed to be a celebration had turned into a full-blown crisis of confidence. Inside team hotels, whispers spread like wildfire. Players were absolutely furious, not just at the fans, but at the leadership that had put them in this impossible position. A'ja Wilson reportedly went off in the locker room after Game 3, telling teammates she was tired of being made the scapegoat for everything. "We show up, we work, we play hard, and somehow it's always our fault," she vented to anyone who would listen. DeWanna Bonner was sitting nearby during that rant, and according to insiders, her silence spoke volumes. Both women had been taking heat for their visible frustration on the court, but neither could deny the obvious truth staring them in the face. The finals had become an embarrassing display of disconnect between players and the fans they desperately needed. Here's where it gets absolutely wild. Within the league offices, executives were scrambling like crazy to contain the fallout. Public relations teams were working overtime, drafting talking points to steer interviews away from the empty arenas. Social media managers tried flooding feeds with empowering highlight clips, hoping to change the narrative completely. Every attempt felt forced and desperate. Fans weren't fooled by the spin campaign. They were still sharing side-by-side comparisons showing packed fever games versus the barren finals. The comments section became a roasting session that nobody could ignore. "You chased away your audience," fans wrote. "Now you're playing for yourselves." Let me break this down even further. Some players from other teams began speaking privately about the growing resentment brewing within the league. Many younger athletes had witnessed firsthand how Caitlin Clark's popularity lifted everyone's paychecks and exposure. They were frustrated that veterans treated her success like a threat instead of an opportunity. One anonymous player admitted something that cut straight to the heart of the problem. "A lot of us are just tired of the drama. We just want the league to grow." That quiet statement reflected what the WNBA leadership was terrified to face. The real divide wasn't just between fans and the league anymore. It was between the old guard and the new era of possibilities. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert held emergency meetings with representatives from both finals teams, practically begging them to focus on basketball and ignore the social media noise. But by that point, it was way too late. The damage had already spread far beyond the court and into mainstream sports conversation. Not only that, but morale inside the locker rooms hit rock bottom. Players weren't just physically exhausted from the games, they were emotionally drained from the constant criticism. Every headline felt personal. Every tweet felt like another attack on their careers and accomplishments. The finals had transformed from competition into pure survival mode. Both A'ja Wilson Here's the absolute breaking point that turned an embarrassing situation into a complete public relations disaster. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert stepped up to the podium for what should have been a routine pre-game press conference, but instead delivered one of the most tone-deaf performances in sports leadership history. The controversy had grown too big to ignore, and everyone in that press room knew the tension was about to explode. Engelbert tried opening with forced optimism, praising the athletes and competition while completely ignoring the elephant in the room. Her words rang completely hollow against the backdrop of half-empty arenas and plummeting ratings. The reporters weren't buying any of it, and their questions came fast, sharp, and absolutely unrelenting. One journalist broke the ice with the question everyone was thinking: "Commissioner, how do you explain record low attendance and fan disinterest in the finals?" Engelbert froze for a brief second, forced the tightest smile imaginable, and responded with the most rehearsed corporate answer possible. She blamed scheduling conflicts, marketing fatigue, and misleading narratives online. But then came the follow-up question that demolished everything. Isn't this really about how the league handled Caitlin Clark's rise and the fan backlash that followed? That was the exact moment the press room atmosphere completely shifted. Engelbert's face stiffened, her tone turned ice cold, and her calm facade cracked right down the middle. "This isn't about one player," she snapped back. "We have incredible talent across the board." The way she said it, with that clipped frustration and defensive energy, only made the situation 10 times worse. Within minutes, clips of her meltdown hit social media, and fans absolutely seized on every awkward second. Hashtags started trending immediately. WNBA without Caitlin and Engelbert out began dominating Twitter and TikTok feeds. This wasn't just criticism anymore. It was open rebellion from a fan base that felt completely unheard and disrespected by league leadership. Fans were done being polite about the obvious problems. Now here's what made this even more devastating. Engelbert's defensive comments made Asia Wilson and DeWanna Bonner look complicit in the league's tone-deaf approach. They suddenly found themselves in the middle of a storm that had grown far beyond their control. The commissioner's refusal to acknowledge what was painfully obvious made everyone involved look completely out of touch. Even neutral analysts who had defended Engelbert throughout her tenure admitted that her press conference responses only widened the gap between leadership and the fans who had fueled the league's historic viewership spike. Sports networks quietly started questioning whether she was fit to lead the organization through this crisis. Let's be completely honest about what happened next. Inside the arena, things weren't getting any better. Cameras kept panning across rows of empty seats, and broadcasters were awkwardly avoiding showing the upper sections entirely. The tension was absolutely palpable. You could feel it in the subdued energy, in the tight expressions on players' faces, and in the way every missed shot felt heavier than it should have. The finals weren't about basketball anymore. They had become a referendum on leadership, fan loyalty, and the league's entire future direction. By the end of her disastrous press conference, Engelbert looked completely exhausted. She tried pivoting back to positivity, but the damage was already done. Her defensiveness had poured gasoline on a fire she couldn't contain. Headlines rolled in immediately. Engelbert melts down. Fans turn on WNBA leadership. Empty seats, empty words. The league was officially in crisis mode, and its own commissioner had just made everything exponentially worse.